entrance of the White House lawn. Of course, on the other side of the White House, it's all been barricaded, and in fact, in the last few weeks, things have changed here because of the threat of terrorism. We're at the annual walkathon of the Palestine Aid Society. Now, we're doing a Mideast Realities program about this, but let's be candid, let's be honest about this. The Palestinian cause has been tremendously reduced in terms of interest, in terms of how people get motivated. They've been announcing this event for many weeks or months now. It's supposed to be taking place in other cities as well, but here in the capital of the United States, as you can see, there are maybe 20, 25, 30 people. They'll now be walking, distributing a few flyers. The police have come, told them they can't really organize here or collect money here or even register here. Many of these are good people. They come here because they care about the issue, but they come largely for themselves, and they don't really face that reality. The amount of money, the amount of aid that's raised is quite insignificant. These are people who come out because they're either Palestinian or supporters of the Palestinian cause. They want to show some solidarity. But if you listen to the speeches that are given at events like this, they don't really make a lot of sense. They pretend that they haven't lost wars. They pretend that there's an intifada still continuing. They pretend that the issue is still being fought, when in reality the Palestinian people are being put on reservations. Most of their land, water, resources have already been taken from them, first in 48, then in 67. Then, in fact, in 93, when the ceremony that took place not far from here on the White House lawn, on the South White House lawn, we can shout that far from here, brought Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin to the White House. And in effect, the Palestinian leaders surrendered to the Americans and to the Israelis. It's known that Yasser Arafat even wanted to come out on the White House lawn and hand his personal gun to the President of the United States during the ceremony, but that was rejected, not by his own people, because few of his own people were in fact asked. It was rejected as much too extreme by the Israelis and by the Americans, who wanted to give the impression not of a Palestinian surrender, but of a Palestinian accommodation, of a real, honest peace agreement. In reality, that's not what it was. In reality, it was a surrender with promises of aid and promises of support. But even those promises, Chairman Arafat, not sure what to call him, Chairman Arafat, Chief Arafat, President Arafat, not sure what to call the authority that he heads. He calls it the Palestine National Authority. The Israelis and the Americans call it the Palestinian Authority. But anyway, in reality, less than 1/10 of the money that was promised has been delivered. There have been no elections. Promises have been broken right and left. More land has been taken. The process of disenfranchisement and putting the Palestinians on reservations has continued. And now it continues with, in fact, the imprimatur of the former organization that was called the PLO. And I say former because in reality the PLO doesn't exist anymore. What exists as an authority that's funded by the United States and by Israel. And in fact, the analogy with what happened to the American Indians in the previous century is becoming more and more and more, unfortunately, accurate.
You have been following what's been going on lately in the so-called peace process, and we have three speakers here today that are going to discuss various aspects of Palestinian life under occupation and give a bit of analysis of what's going on. I want to say, just to speak on behalf of Palestine Aid Society, just to give you a brief idea of why it's so important for us to be here. In the last couple of years, since the Madrid-Oslo Accords, the conditions for Palestinians in the occupied territories have deteriorated drastically. Unemployment in Gaza has reached almost 60%. Palestinian political prisoners remain in jail. The Israelis continue with impunity to confiscate Palestinian land, especially in Jerusalem. Before it used to be, you hear land, they confiscate, they don't say much about it. Now Rabin stands in the middle of the Knesset and says, we are taking this land in Jerusalem and we're going to use it to build settlements. This is what the Israelis call creating the facts on the ground. And meanwhile, we are continuing to be thrown at it. There's a peace process and there's peace. We are for peace and justice and dignity for the Palestinian people, a peace that will guarantee Palestinian national and historic rights to the land of Palestine and self-determination for the Palestinians. We did not fight for 50 years in order to get the right to take our garbage out, or to have a stamp, or to maybe even raise our flag. This is not what the struggle is all about, and this is not what so many of our people lost their lives for. So we thank you all for...
Message of solidarity from the few books. Am I clear? Okay. From the few books of Israelis of the left, of the Israeli left, that have not struggled with the kind of so-called peace that Taleb has mentioned, and continue to diligently work for just solution in Palestine. And I want to point out that one of the things that I find most difficult to do these days is to talk about the occupation, because people in this town and throughout the U.S. Really believe that stage handshake that we all saw on our TV screen and the rhetoric that came with it. So it's very difficult. People don't like to be confronted with images of occupation. And I think today more than ever, it's very important for us in our private conversations, in our lectures, in this walk, when people ask us to point out that the occupation enters its 28th year next week. This means a whole generation, actually 2 generations that were born under occupation and have not seen much improvement since Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands on the South Lawn of the White House. For peace to have meaning that is more than a signed document or a televised handshake, it needs to relate to the daily lives of people. People need to see that there has been an improvement in their daily life. Last time I visited the West Bank and Gaza Strip was in January. And as people that came here today know, there hasn't been much improvement in terms of the violations of basic human rights, violation of international law, beginning with the fact that the occupation is a violation of illegal law. So while the international media, especially the U.S., commands Israel for its willingness to withdraw from some of the territories, people forget that Israel has been there for 28 years in violation of international law. And I think people need to be reminded that this is the case. People are not aware that basic rights such as access to health care, freedom to travel, that such rights are being violated daily because of the closure that has been imposed on Palestinians for almost 3 years under the pretext of protecting Israel's national security. People do not know that Palestinians, that the right to employment has been violated under the same pretext. And these are things that I think we could talk to fellow Americans about, because and make the connections to some of the daily problems that people face here. In other words, point out that when you don't have a roof over your head and you don't have money to feed your kids, peace really remains an abstract thing, and you cannot sit in your living room and feel good about 2 leaders shake hands somewhere in a remote place, actually in this city. So that was one thing that I wanted to share. The other thing that I want to share has to do with what has been happening to groups on the grassroots on both sides on the Palestinian-Israeli divide since the signing of Oslo, which really affects our work in this country. The money in terms of support for NGOs on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian divide has gone only to groups that express their uncritical support of Oslo. In other words, groups that mention that peace could not come without justice do not receive funds anymore from big donors that they used to receive. We know that it affects our work in this country. It does affect the work on the bus booths in Palestine and the work of youth groups in Israel that take issue with many of the problems of Oslo Accord, of the Oslo. So I think we need to, when we try to raise funds, when we support groups in the West Bank and Gaza, we need to really pay attention and support those groups that have suffered in the aftermath of Oslo because of their principled position. And the last but not least is that we shouldn't be discouraged by our numbers. We know that people respond to what they see, what CNN allows them to see. We know that we've struggled before the Intifada started, and it was easier for a while to talk to people about Palestinian oppression and suffering because people saw those images on their TV screens. But we know we have contacts with people in the West Bank and Gaza. We get alternative information, and we know that those pictures are still a daily reality. And we have now the obligation, when CNN doesn't do it, when other media outlets don't do it, we as individuals, groups such as PAS, are at the forefront of the struggle. So we should not let these numbers be discouraged. We should be actually pleasantly surprised that we as individuals and as a group know that we did not have the luxury of basically go home and uncritically endorse that so-called peace accord, because we know, as that Tal has mentioned here, that this is not what we've struggled for, and we know that there is another way that begins with the immediate end of the occupation, and with a just solution to the conflict. Have a pleasant walk, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Simona, for that very good talk and analysis. Our next speaker is Ala Salhab. He will give you a personal story of life under occupation. Ala was imprisoned by the Israelis for 6 months in the late 80s during the days of the Intifada. He is a resident of Jerusalem and can talk firsthand about the latest land confiscation, and will give you pretty much a personal account of life under occupation and what it means to be a Palestinian struggling for freedom and dignity and justice. So, Ala Salhab.
I'd like to start with, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. As a great philosopher once said, the eye is the window of the soul. Before my last trip to Jerusalem last month, I was very proud, very thrilled, very excited to go back home and to see the joy in the eyes of the Palestinian children after the handshake that gave them hope for the future. Our road lies in the hand of our children, but the Palestinian children hold absolutely nothing. They hold nothing because they have been denied of their childhood freedom. They have been denied of their basic education. They have been denied not just for education, and not just for freedom, and not just for being a child in this own neighborhood, to be tortured in jail. I'm talking about from 7 years old up to 80 years old. They hold nothing because hope was stolen from in between their hands. And we are here today and every day, and we ask everybody who sees us or who hears us to help us save the innocent children the innocent children of Palestine and tried to restore hope to their hands and hearts. And also Khalid mentioned about being in prison. I spent 6 months in prison during my high school. My first week in prison was absolutely just being a young Palestinian in his own neighborhood, picked up on the street or during the neighborhood and put in jail because just simply being a Palestinian. Just to say, yes, I did such a thing, which is such an act I never committed or I never did. And then spent 6 months without even going to court. After 6 months, I spent it in Beersheba jail. I was free to walk home from Beersheba on my own because I never went to court, and court asked the police station to put me in jail. They didn't want to show the court that they stopped me for such a long period of time. And I hope for all of you, pleasant walk today. And I hope everybody will see us walking, asking for freedom of occupation. And God bless you.
Thank you, Ala. Our final speaker here today, I think most of you know who he is, Mr. Wafa Nasser. Wafa is the Vice President of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC, and has been a long-time activist and supporter of the Arab American community and a long-time supporter of Palestinian society. So I'm happy to introduce Mr. Wafa Nasser.
Well, thank you very much. At that time when the disaster took place in Palestine in 1967, I was living in Brazil at that time. And as I remember, few days after the disaster, I was called to appear on one of the TVs in Sao Paulo. After so many of our cold leaders were ashamed or afraid or reserved not to confront or go in front of a mic and talk to the people. I remember one of the questions which was asked, why you think that you lost the war? And they mean as Arabs, Palestinian and Arabs. And why you think that only while you outnumber the Israelis there, they were able to defeat you in this war? Well, I commented on 2 points. If we were outnumbering somebody and that body was able to defeat us, or in the other, if we were really defeated. I'm not going to speak politics. I'm not going to speak about the peace talks and the wilderness of these peace talks. I want to go back to the people, to the determination of the people themselves. Because as long as this issue is in the hands of the politicians, we will continue being confused if we are really starting a peace or starting a war. But if we go back to the determination of the people, and I don't exclude the Israeli people because they are people as we are people, then leave it to the people and the people will solve it. But let me go back to Sao Paulo. I told them that we were confronting one of the most modern machines of war, where not only few people were behind this machine, but all the technology of the world was behind that machine. And how we confronted it with, as we say in Arabic, with our bare hands. And yes, technology vis-a-vis unarmed people, it's very easy to register a victory. Now, if we were defeated, well, I think we were not defeated. Why? Because the goal of that war is to crush our people, to eliminate them as a potential in order to claim their rights. Did that war or that victory achieve this goal? No, it did not. And I told them at that point that yes, I am today proud more than any time in my life to be an Arab, because the aim and the goal of this war is to shut up my mouth, to eliminate me as a human being, to put me a number, as you said, and only a number. But no, we are still, and we are there. And after a few years, the Intifada put back the issue on not only the international arena, but also on the national arena in the Arab world. And in spite of what I say, the interruption of this Intifada, with what we call it the peace talks nowadays, I think the Intifada in a way is still pursuing its course. If we go back to South Lebanon, and we find that yes, a kind of resistance, a kind of Intifada is still going there, hurting occupation, and every day making the world remember that there is a case and there is a right which will never die. So I don't want to be emotional in my address to you today, but I want to go back to the sources of power, to the sources of strength, and the sources of power and strength. It is in our people, in the vein of our people, because it's the vein of the war machine to Israel. If we can overcome the circumstances which created this vein, to let that whole machine immobilize completely, but the vein was attached to your soil, to your people, no one can cut it. My prediction that we are continuing with our Intifada, and we are continuing with our resistance, and it's a call upon all the people in our area, Israelis and Arab, to put aside our politicians and don't give them credit, the credit to us, to the people. And this is my message to you today, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wafa. I think you can gather from all what the speaker said. Your presence here is so important. Your presence here and the solidarity with our people is so important. And we will continue and must continue our march and our advocacy of freedom and peace and justice for the Palestinian people until we achieve our goals and our rights to an independent Palestinian state with its capital in Jerusalem.
This is for the East Realities Television. What your impression is of this Palestine Aid Society annual walk?
I wouldn't call a gathering of 20 people a walk to begin with. They don't have a speaker system that works. We cannot hear what the speakers are saying unless you are very close by. And even they don't really say anything of importance. It's the same cliches we have heard again and again. There is nothing new here, and that's why nobody ever bothers to show up, because they know what is going to happen every year. They're not doing anything.
You sound like you know something about the Palestinian issue. Mark Bruzonsky, your host for Mideast Realities, out here on the ellipse of the White House. The Palestine Aid Society has just held its meeting, a few speakers. They're going to be holding a walk I think we're going to call it a day. Thank you for tuning in, and please tune in next time on this channel, same day of the week, same time, for another episode of Mideast Realities.